It's a wonder of why. I do not understand why the ABC and the mainstream media generally, although they're now informing us that the Australian economy grew hardly at all in the last quarter, and certainly not much in the last year, why they ignored the really big news, which came out in February and would have been crucial in the by-election. And this was that an international organization had confirmed that we had suffered the biggest loss in living standards in 2 decades. That was the OECD. Now, that news, apart from the Financial Review and Leith Van Onselen's micro business and ADH, nobody else was reporting this, which is quite extraordinary. It was fundamental news affecting all Australians and highly relevant to the Dunkley by-election. We're told everything in excruciating detail about Taylor Swift, about the Prime Minister dancing there, about his going down by RAAF jet to another party down in Melbourne, being given by a billionaire. All of this was given to us, that he was flying back again on the RAAF jet to Sydney to decide whether to go to a function in Sydney, that is the Mardi Gras in Sydney. The Prime Minister, in doing this, was probably, because he's alone on an RAAF jet with a few people, his carbon footprint is probably that of much more than the annual carbon footprint of most Australians. All of this was treated as big news, but we weren't told the really big news, and that is that a prestigious international organization, the OECD, had confirmed that we had the biggest drop in living standards in 2 decades. And there was an expert view in the Financial Review that there was little hope of an early recovery. All quite extraordinary. And there was also news associated with that we were underperforming by 8% the average of comparable countries. All of this had arisen during the term of the present government, and it contrasted with, for example, the United States and the United Kingdom, who were in positive territory in the same period. At the same time, we learned another thing, which again was basically kept away from the Dunkley by-election, kept away from most Australians, and that was that the climate catastrophe chickens had finally come home to roost. And it's remarkable that we weren't told this. So the biggest drop in Australian living standards was kept away from the Dunkley by-election. So was the fact that the climate catastrophe chickens had finally come home to roost. Australia's most celebrated geologist, Professor Ian Plimer, said on this program that whenever he asks his scientific colleagues to provide him with learned papers demonstrating that CO2 is the cause of global warming, and they say they will, but they never do that. Plimer takes the view that CO2 is not the cause of climate change. He proves this. The proof is so persuasive, and that is that in the history of this Earth, there have been 6 ice ages, and at the beginning of every ice age on this planet, there was far more CO2 in the atmosphere than there is today. Far more. And that didn't stop the world from freezing over, with parts of the world freezing over with miles of ice on top of the Earth. So how is it that CO2 today is the cause of global warming, or as the UN says, global boiling? In any event, the chief scientist of Australia has told us, he's admitted, that even if we closed down everything in Australia, it wouldn't have any effect on the world temperatures. We're far too small. Yet the Albanese government insists on going through and changing our very modern electricity system, which is cheap, and reliable to one which is the world's most expensive, or certainly among the world's most expensive, and increasingly unreliable. Now, it seems the Indonesians must have cleverer politicians than Australians, because they do what Australian politicians say not to do, and it benefits Indonesia. Firstly, they decided to ban the export of nickel with a view to, in the period of the ban, having people come in with capital and build up an Indonesian nickel industry. Then, instead of doing what we do, relying on so-called renewables, the Indonesians decided to use imported Australian coal to produce cheaper electricity. Consequently, what they've done is they've outpriced us in the nickel industry. They are, in fact, replacing our once very successful nickel industry, which is now completely uncompetitive. Now, we were told by the government, by Mr. Bowen, that there's a green premium, that people around the world are very happy to pay more if they know that you're following the green position in relation to energy. Well, frankly, there's no such thing. People pay for nickel and anything else on the basis of price, quality, and delivery. Price, quality, and delivery, just as they do for anything else. As I've just said, Federation, we were the second richest people in the world. Now we're the 20th, and that is constantly falling. Take Singapore. Within living memory, she was an impoverished former colony with no mineral wealth. Yet the Singaporeans, in terms of GDP per capita, are now twice as wealthy as Australians. No mineral wealth, but they're twice as wealthy as Australians. And it's even worse than that for Australians, because Singapore, with lower taxes and cheaper housing, means that their disposable income is significantly more than twice as much as Australians. Their education is not producing large numbers of effectively illiterate and innumerate students. And they're defending themselves. The problem remains our political class and our elites. There is a solution, and you can read about this on a petition on change.org/Take Back Your Country. It's worth looking at that.